Welcome to the 76 Capital Leadership Series. My name is Wayne Kimmel. I'm your host and managing partner of 76 Capital, the sports tech venture capital fund. On this show, I interview top entrepreneurs, athletes, and executives who are truly shaping and many times changing the sports business industry. I want to give a quick shout out to my producer back at the station, Ty, who's doing a hell of a job pushing all the buttons and making it all happen back there. Thanks for all the great work that you do. You can follow me on Twitter at Wayne Kimmel, and definitely follow 76 Capital across all the social media networks and subscribe to our podcast, as well as become a subscriber to our YouTube channel as well, where you can watch all the 76 Capital Leadership Series. And as you know, if you're an entrepreneur and you're building a company in the sports industry today, and you're trying to do the next thing, whether that is in the sports industry, whether that's in sports betting, whether that's in esports, whether that's in sports media, whether that's across all sports tech, please reach out to us because we want to talk with you. We want to see if we can help you truly change the world and do some amazing things in the sports industry. Now let's get to it. We have an amazing guest today on our show. We have Akin Caulker, the CEO of the Athletic Network. You can find Akin on Twitter at Akin_SC. He's a great follow. You also can follow him on Instagram. There's lots of really exciting things that he posts up there as well. And I'm just really excited to be able to bring on Akin to our 76 Capital Leadership Series. So Akin, welcome to our 76 Capital Leadership Series.
Well, Wayne, thank you very much for the introduction. I thought we had agreed that you'd mention I'm the best dressed agent in Europe as well. You didn't do that, but I appreciate you having me nonetheless, mate.
Well, I was going to get to that, Akin. That was the big part of what we want to do here is talk about that. I mean, because look at that shirt you're wearing. I mean, if you're just listening to this as on the podcast, you got to go to our YouTube channel and check out what he's wearing and those great glasses. I mean, you truly are the best dressed agent in sports, no doubt.
I appreciate that. Well, I've had the pleasure of meeting some top agents in my time. I actually met Rich Paul a few years ago, and he's really well dressed. But I think, for me, I think having a family full of women definitely helped kind of fuel my passion for fashion. So I appreciate those kind words, mate.
Well, Akin, let's get into it, right? Let's learn a little bit about your background, who you are, where you grew up, and about your family today.
Absolutely. So listen, as you can hear by the accent, I believe I may be the first Brit on the show, which is a huge honor for me. I've been watching for a long time now, as you know, sharing and retweeting and getting a lot of insights myself. My favorite episode, probably because I'm an agent, is the episode that you did with David Falk last year, which was unbelievable. So, really appreciate you having me again. For me, listen, London is home. It's where I was born, where I was raised. And in London, football is king. But not your football, the real football, soccer, right? So, for me, that's in my DNA. Always has been. We play from, I guess you guys have pee-wee football is your kind of youth setup. For us, it's just playing football wherever you can, in the street, in the park, at school, after school, before school. So that was what was in my DNA. I had the pleasure also of spending 4 years in Los Angeles when I was very young. My mum's a writer, so we spent 4 years in Hollywood. I lived in Santa Monica. Unbelievable experience. Went to Crossroads Elementary School. So shout out Crossroads. I still have some of my oldest childhood friends are from there. Actually, the Snapchat co-founder, Evan Spiegel, was in my grade, and I want to say grade 1 maybe, or grade 2. So yeah, came back to London in 1998. I've been here ever since, but that in a nutshell is me. I really, my upbringing was great because I got to see life from 2 very different perspectives. Living in Europe and living in America is like night and day. The way that we do things culturally, emotionally, physically even, we don't have any muscle beaches here, So that's a bit of who I am, and super excited to get into this convo.
Well, Akin, also, let me ask you a couple questions on that. I mean, you talk about soccer, or as you said, the real football. Were you a footballer as a kid?
I played, and I guess looking back as a youngster, I wouldn't say I had a burning desire to go pro in football, so to speak, but certainly rugby was my, when it comes to pursuing a career in sport, that was my focus. So at 13, I actually went to a school just outside of London in the countryside, Lord Wandsworth College. And one of our famous alumni is a guy called Johnny Wilkinson, who won the World Cup for England in 2003. So rugby for me was a huge focus. I had the pleasure of being in one or two academy setups, as I got a little bit older, 15, 16, 17. And so it was always my focus to be in sport, whether I was going to play, whether I was going to manage athletes, whether I was going to broker deals, who knew, but I knew sport was going to be my focus. And I also did a few others. I wasn't very good at tennis. I'm going to say my golf game still is a bit weak. I swam for a bit, and I love track and field. And obviously the Olympics are on right now. So it's amazing to see all that going on.
Absolutely. I mean, so Akin, did you have any specific teams that you cheered for or rooted for, growing up, whether they were rugby or football teams, and that are your favorites?
Well, listen, before I was back in England in 1998, and I feel as though at that age, 7, 8 is really where you start to form your team allegiances moving forward. I was in LA, remember? So the Lake Show was probably my first love. And with that being said, though, I didn't have any Lakers jerseys. I was all MJ. I was all Chicago Bulls and, doing that sort of thing. But in terms of sport, basketball was probably my first love, the first sport that I was exposed to. So definitely the Lakers, just by virtue of where I was. But back here, Arsenal is my team. I'm unbiased now. We do business with teams across the Premier League. So my heartstrings aren't tugged as tightly as they would have been a few years ago. No specific rugby teams, but I'm just a fan of sport in general. But Arsenal is my team, yeah.
Well, Akin, so you always, sports seem to be always part of your life, and you were able to make a transition to allowing that to be your profession.
Yeah.
Tell us about that journey. How did that happen?
Listen, for me, Wayne, honestly, you could speak to 100 sports agents and get 100 different ways that they got into this business. It could be a family friend was an athlete and I wanted to help manage him or her. It could be I was a former player. I saw how athletes were represented and I wanted to change that. It could be a David Falk situation where he's actually studying law and by virtue of different contacts or internships, he starts to move into the sporting world. So there's no one set way. And for me, mine was actually injury. So I would probably still at 30 years old be chasing the rugby dream if I hadn't ruptured my Achilles at about 23 years old. A big Samoan landed on the back of my leg. I had to stop playing for a year and a half. It's obviously a very serious injury, your Achilles tendon. And in that time, a lot of the guys that I knew or played against or had known growing up went like this. Their trajectory was amazing. They were starting to play for England and get big deals and get sponsorships. And there I was learning how to walk to the kitchen again in a big moon boot in the summer, by the way. So that wasn't very nice either. And in that moment, I made the transition into using the two things that I have or had, which are essential for any agent: my network and access to players. If you've got those and you're able to utilize both, you'll be a really good agent. So I kind of started slowly, not really knowing what I was doing, truth be told. What is sports agency apart from being a dot connector when you really boil it down? So I was trying to shake and bake, so to speak, and do different things. And I made a lot of mistakes, but that was the best learning curve ever. So I started slowly but surely to do a lot of commercial deals for guys that I knew, England rugby players, England football players, some Team GB Olympians. And then slowly but surely, I got to a position where I had enough experience to launch the Athletic Network. And here we are today.
That's amazing. It's amazing to hear how it all sort of came together for you. We are here on our 76 Capital Leadership Series with a special guest, Akin Caulker, the best dressed agent out there. And we got to make sure that we get that in there for you. You know, every time we get a chance here. You know, listen. I mean, some of my guys at Rubicon Talent will be saying, well, you know, like Dave's a pretty good dresser. I don't know. You guys will have to have like a contest or something someday. So
I'm ready. Catwalk, no problem. Runway, I'm ready to go whenever, whatever the weather.
Oh man, I can't believe I said that his partners are going to be making fun of him for this now. They're going to love this. They're going to love that.
We'll let the players decide. We'll let the players decide who's the best dresser, and we'll go from there.
I like that idea. I like that idea a lot. Well, so you started the Athletic Network in 2016. You know, as you said, you were doing deals for soccer and rugby, and now you work with Olympic clients. What are some of the really exciting deals that you can share with us that you've done so far?
Man, you know, it's funny because, first of all, let me just say, 5 years in this business is a drop in the ocean. You know, I've learned so much, but I'm sure that agents who have been in the game doubly as long, if not triple, quadruple the time, will probably even themselves say they've still got a lot to learn, right? So that says it all. This isn't like studying medicine, where I know that there are always evolutions in terms of procedures and different medicines that you can use, but the basis in terms of how the body works pretty much stays the same, right? In sports agency, the landscape, I mean, look at the landscape 2 years ago to where it is today. The focus on mental health, the focus on female empowerment in sport, a focus on cross-pollinating athletes from different sports and creating content. So I say all that to say, for me, every deal has been so unique. Honestly, I truly mean that. I was really, really fortunate. I've been able to broker some great deals. One of them for Victoria Beckham and Reebok Women in 2018. That was a really cool one. I didn't get to meet her, but we brokered a deal for her to be a keynote speaker at the Forbes Women's Summit in New York, which was amazing. And to be behind the scenes, connecting the dots, talking figures, understanding what a profile like that requires was great, right? And set me up for when we do similar deals down the line. In terms of recent ones, one of our, and I know that you guys have a great swimmer in Caleb Dressel as well. We also have a great swimmer and a close friend of mine called Adam Peaty, who is by far and away the most mentally tough athlete I've ever worked with or just known. I call him RoboCop. He's a different breed completely. And at the start of this year, we co-brokered alongside his agency, TLA Worldwide, a sportswear deal for Adam with a brand called Castor. And it's an amazing deal because one of the main focuses on that deal was, how can we tell Adam's story? Not just how can we put some clothes or our logo on him and market that. And, you know, he's just won 2 gold goals and I think a bronze or a silver in Tokyo. So, and he's 25, so his star is only continuing to rise. But that deal was great because we're talking about how can we extract the personality of the player and send that out into the world, right? Send that out into the audience. So those are just 2 examples. I've done a whole load more. We have quite a few in the works right now, which is super exciting. I'm about to give you an exclusive here, Wayne.
Oh, let's hear it. You know, maybe we need like a drum roll or something in the background.
Yeah, we do. Yeah. So we've just completed, literally 24 hours ago, a deal in the esports space for Lamborghini, which is really cool. I can't say just yet who the partner is, but if you take a luxury automobile developer, manufacturer like Lamborghini, who are at the top of the tree, right? There's no more unique, there's no more endearing brand in that world than Lamborghini. And we've just brokered a deal on their behalf to bring their brand into the esports world in a way that visually will have not been seen before. So as and when I'm allowed to explain more, I will, but for sure I'll keep you updated with that one.
Well, Akin, I love to hear that you're doing deals in the esports industry. And it's so great to hear that the luxury brands, right, are now really leaning in. to the industry. Or is that something that you're seeing as a trend across all of esports now?
Without a shadow of a doubt. And I mean, the start of the pandemic in 2020 accelerated esports and its platform, its reachability. I hope that's a word that I haven't just made up. Its scale tenfold. I mean, it was unbelievable. All of a sudden, esports was in every home. Every person was doing, or a lot more people were doing it. I think Twitch's viewership numbers went up, almost doubled in terms of billions of hours of content watched on their platform, people streaming and gaming. And so for us, to answer your question, the esports ecosystem has exploded massively. We've always been in it as an agency, and in terms of what we want our players to do, gaming goes hand in hand, right? Especially for the younger generation of players, it's what they grew up or have grown up doing. They're digitally native. You know, I saw a quote that said, some kids now are swiping before they're wiping, right? Which is really true. Like, you got kids who can swipe open on an iPad before they can brush their teeth or whatever it is. So the world has changed, and esports is right at the front of that. We've seen FaZe Clan recently on the cover of Sports Illustrated with LeBron's son, Bronny. We've just brokered a deal for Lamborghini in the esports space. I mean, a few years ago, who would have thought that would happen, you know? So to answer your question, it's definitely growing, and it's about doing it in the right way. It's about being organic, because something that's very, very true is that the esports audience are one of the most sensitive and most hard-hitting that you can find. And what I mean by that is, if you try and just throw money at the esports audience, they're not going to be receptive, right? If you're trying to place something in there unorganically, it's going to get a really bad rep and reputation. But if you tell stories and activate partnerships which resonate with the audience, which are relevant to that particular game or that particular genre, there's literally no limit to what you can do. So esports for me is huge, absolutely. I'm looking forward to, you know, I love watching all the Madden game releases, seeing who's on the cover and all of this sort of thing. So I'm looking forward to seeing its growth in the next few years.
Well, it's super exciting to have you on our 76 Capital Leadership Series. We have Akin Caulker, you know, the best dressed agent out there, you know, who's the CEO of the Athletic Network. You know, Akin, this is something, it's been interesting to hear. You know, you've talked about authenticity a couple times now, about the fact how you work with brands and your clients and making sure that things are true to them, and that they're not just basically like holding up a bottle and saying we're wearing the clothes just to wear them. You talk about the same kind of authenticity around esports. And making sure that, as you know, it's such a discerning audience. I mean, they'll just turn you off immediately if they think if it's not authentic. How did that sort of come about? And that seems like a really important thing as you work with brands and your athletes, and making sure that you have that you have that understanding. How do you get to that point where you know the brands and you know the people really well?
Well, listen, one of the big things about sports agency is it's a business of emotion. You don't need to be, I don't think, academically astute to be an agent. Of course, it helps to have, you know, an education and an understanding of how things work and logistics. But far more important is your emotional quota. Are you able to relate to athletes? Are you able to relate to the key decision makers at brands and understand what isn't being said? Because anyone can have a Zoom call, anyone can start an email thread, anyone can jump on LinkedIn and send messages, great. But to dig deeper and go into the deeper waters where the really cool deals get done is all about, can you read between the lines, essentially? You know, and one of my favorite quotes is, the notes, I think it's either the notes in between the sounds are important as the notes themselves, right? The pauses and that sort of thing. So to answer your question, the reason why we talk about authenticity, the reason why we talk about relatability, all of these things. And that's across sports, by the way. NFL, NBA, ice hockey, esports, the soccer world, rugby, whatever it might be, is because audiences now, their time is less, right? It's not like back in the day where you had 5 channels, and so whatever was on the TV, you had to watch. Now it's like you've got Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, Snapchat, over-the-top media, newspapers, digital signage at games, airplane advertising. The list goes on, right? I could go on for an hour or so. And so what does that mean? It means that audiences are only going to focus on something that grabs them, and real grabs. Force and fake doesn't grab your attention really for the most part. So it's really important to have that emotional understanding of how to connect with people. And I think that the same is true in business as it is in life. You know, sports agency is relationships. So often people try to break it down and make it really complicated and say, oh, you have to study this. Okay, maybe you do. Everyone has a different path. But if you don't understand emotionally how to navigate your way through different relationships, you'll never be a success in this business, and it will be really hard in any walk of life. So that's a really important part. That's why we focus on authenticity, because that's about understanding who your audience is and who you are, and then growing from there.
Well, it's interesting, you know, here in the US, we have, just like you talked about, and across the world, I guess, in sports today, there's a lot of change. There's a lot of disruption. There are entrepreneurs, athletes, teams, leagues, conferences that are just transforming the way sports is being looked at. One of the big things here in the US today is sports betting, which is a new thing. You know, being able to be, you know, legal across, other than the state of Nevada, now being able to be legal across most of the states now in the US and potentially all of them very soon. That's something that has been kind of normal in the UK. Talk about how sports betting has been involved in the sports world in the UK, you know, to date, what that's like as a fan going into a stadium and being able to bet on games. This is all a new thing that's really happening here in the United States right now.
Well, I'm not sure what it's like in the US. I'd be interested for you to let me know. But here in England, if you're a football agent, a registered intermediary, you can't legally bet on any football games. I don't know if it's like that in America, but so I'm not allowed to bet on football games, being a football agent, because there's a danger of tampering kind of thing, so to speak, right? Or game management, game fixing. So I just thought I'd highlight that. That's quite an interesting thing, and that's across the leagues. Even if I only have 4 players who play in the Premier League, I can't place a bet on a League 2 game or anything like that. So that's an interesting thing just to note first and foremost. Sports betting for us has been part of the sports culture forever. I believe, and I should know, I believe betting companies are allowed to still be on front of shirts in terms of sponsorship. There was talk of banning that. I know in Spain and in Italy that is banned. So no football team can sign a deal with a bookies. We call them bookies. You call them, I guess, betting shops. But we call them bookies. So that's another interesting cultural difference, right? Actually, recently, the Spanish league has said to the government or the federation, hey, please, can we open the door to reallow bookies or betting companies to be sponsors, because the pandemic has cost us revenue in terms of fans being able to come to games. That's going to be a huge boost for us. So there's a real tug of war going on at the moment. I think it heightens, from a fan's perspective, the intrigue of the game. If you've got money on it, whether it's £5, $5, or if you're betting Mayweather money, it really adds to what's going on the field. And you have to remember, sport is entertainment, right? when we saw sport with no fans, I don't know about you, but watching college football games with no fans was like, oh my God, I'd rather watch, my grandmother do some knitting. It was just same in England, the Premier League games with no fans. My goodness. So that just shows you how important that engagement side of sport is. It's not just the 22 players on the pitch when you're talking football. It's not just I think it's maybe 13 in American football, whatever, per team. It's about the whole tailgate. Have you got money on the game? How's my team doing? You guys do over and unders and 500 teams. So, yeah, look, betting here is a huge part and a huge fabric of what we do and how we do it in sport.
Well, let's stay on the topic of money here. There's some fascinating things that are happening in the soccer / your football world, right? I mean, there's yesterday, as we're taping this show, there was the news that Messi is not resigning. There's these unbelievable deals that are happening right now across the transfer market and across Europe. Talk about what's happening in that world and some of your involvement in that.
So listen, it's an interesting one because last summer, we have 2 transfer windows in European football. And in fact, in world football, the summer transfer window and the January transfer window, the winter window. It's very different in NBA, NFL, etc., where you have free agency window times that players can move. It's actually, I think, a little bit more flexible in American sports for players to sign. But in England, in football, it's quite rigid, quite specific. Last summer, so this time last year, no clubs were spending big money. Why? Because revenues had been hit from every angle, right? So they hadn't generated as much as they had predicted. In fact, they had to go the other way and consolidate and get rid of staff and do all of these things. But also, you have to look at the PR angle. How does it look? A club in the height of a pandemic, global pandemic, spending tens, sometimes hundreds of millions on an asset, right? An investment, which is a player, when people are still in hospital, when, infrastructures have crumbled. It just doesn't look good. So last summer, clubs were a lot more quiet and a lot more reserved. This summer, we're slowly but surely getting back to normality. The Premier League has just signed a new, I guess it's a 10-year, I believe, media rights deal with Sky Sports, BT Sport, and I forget the third major channel. But I mean, that's billions, right? So clubs are now back to, okay, we've got revenue to spend. And also fans, similar to an NFL draft, they want the top pick, right? They want the best players. So you have all of these different pressures. You want to sign players to make your fans happy, but you also don't want to be doing it at the wrong time and look as though you're being insensitive to the world and what's happening around you. And there's a lot of big deals happening, a lot of big deals. For me, we work more towards the commercial side, although we are involved in the intermediary end as well. It's a very murky world, I have to say, and I'm sure David Falk and Rich Paul and all of these other names will tell you that. In fact, I remember reading an article saying that there were some agents that Rich Paul would hear were bad-mouthing him. They were both going after the same client, and then someone would be saying something untoward about him. And it's a similar thing here. I've heard of agents having bounties on their heads, believe it or not. I know that's not very PC, but I just thought I'd put that out there. Hopefully no one's put a price on my head, hopefully not. But yeah, listen, that's where we're at. The market is always moving. And regarding Messi, wherever he goes, something that people forget is this. You might see a club sign a player for 50 million and go, oh my God, 50 million euros, that is an obscene amount of money for one player. However, let's say that player is a big name and he comes to a club and sells 200,000 shirts. All of a sudden, there's revenue being generated back into the club. So that 50 million that they spent all of a sudden is more like 45, right? Then how many more fans are starting to buy tickets because they want to see Cristiano, Messi, LeBron, Justin Fields, one of your guys, right? The big arm shooter. So you got to understand that this is more than just a transaction. There's a whole ecosystem behind it, and I'm really excited for this summer for sure.
Well, it's certainly exciting to see all the moves and the fact that you just have players moving around, and again, it just increases the excitement and the interest that it come in within the markets, and that's something that's just amazing. Which again, makes the, as you said, the commercial side, the brands, everyone really interested in wanting to lean in because, look, there's one thing left out there that has appointment viewing today, and that's sports. Mm-hmm. And so, share with us the pitch that you make to brands as to why they should be getting into sports and why they should be working with you and your talent during this time now and just in general, and why sports is such an important way for brands to be able to reach their audience.
Absolutely. And that's a really good question, right? And or a really good prompt, I should say, because there are a number of ways that a brand can spend its money. Right? Its marketing budget, its sponsorship budget. It doesn't have to be on an athlete. It doesn't have to be in sports. It could be in film. It could be TV advertising. It could be just in-house, right? Creating content that way. The one thing that you're never, ever going to be able to replicate, however, is the passion that people have for athletes and the stories that sports tells. I mean, Tom Brady won a Super Bowl last year, right? And all of a sudden he's throwing the Lombardi between yachts and he's on the tequilas and all these sort of things. You can't script that. And those are conversations that brands can ride the coattails of to bring audiences into their ecosystem and then sell. So instead of how it was back in the day, we call it BM, before advertising, how did people know what the best thing in the world was or the best thing in that region? It was word of mouth, right? It was, hey, so-and-so at this market stall has the juiciest lychees. You should go there. Then all of a sudden advertising came in. And instead of having to wait for someone to tell you who was the best, you saw it on billboards, you had it in newspapers, all the rest of it. But then something changed, and all of a sudden, our focus went back to being in our hands, and we have all of the social media channels that we've spoken about. So to answer your question, sport is such a unique equalizer because irrespective of race, gender, religion, where you are in the world, sometimes I'm up at 3 a.m. watching a college football game whilst you are, right? And I'm sure we'll have a talk as the season unfolds about who's going to win. And I think maybe Spencer Rattler will get the Heisman this year, but let's wait and see. We'll have to wait and see if he can, follow in the footsteps of many others. But how unique is that? Me in London, you on a completely different continent, but we're both focused and engaged in the same thing. And, one thing I'd like to highlight, or an athlete I'd like to highlight, is Sha'Carri Richardson, the US sprinter, represented by a fantastic agent, Ronaldo Nehemiah, who actually played American football, I believe. I believe he had some seasons for the 49ers back in the day. If you look at Sha'Carri Richardson...
And I got to interrupt, and also is an alum of the University of Maryland, where I went. So
Wow. I didn't know that. Well, he's definitely going to be watching this, so we'll get him to repost and share. But he's truly a great guy. But the reason I mentioned Sha'Carri is because right now there's no better story in terms of the power of sport, right? Because she's real and she's authentic. You saw at the US trials, and I know she had her situation post-trials, and that's up for conjecture whether she should have been banned or, well, it's not up for conjecture whether she should have been banned, but it's a different conversation. But Sha'Carri went from a relative unknown in terms of outside of the track and field world to now being in Kanye West music videos. right? In the span of 4 or 6 weeks. There's no other industry that catapults you. Maybe music, to be fair, you can be a nobody one day and a somebody the next, but she's going to go on to do great things. And the reason why is because she's relatable, right? She won the US trials. What's the first thing she did? Went up into the stands and hugged her grandmother. How many people can relate to getting good news and the first person you want to call is someone super close to you or who's looked after you, a parent, a guardian, a partner, a son, a daughter, whatever? We can all relate to that. Every single person on earth. And so that's what the power of sport is about. And that's what, with my agency, we really focus on bringing to life.
Well, can you talk about authenticity, relatability, passion? You know, the one thing I also noticed from a number of things that I've seen online about you is this using the power of entrepreneurship and this idea and this mentality of that you can just make it happen. Like you can go and change the world. You can do that on your own. There is nothing that you can't do if you put your mind to it. And we love that at 76 Capital. As we love to say, we love to work with entrepreneurs, you know, who are smart and nice, who want to change the world and truly make the impossible possible. That's what we're all about. And I think you have a very similar mindset. Share with us and our audience here on our 76 Capital Leadership Series some of the mindset that you have and the beliefs that you have that you can truly make anything happen in life and in this world.
Well, I'll tell you a story that I've told to my team and people around me, but I've never told this to the world. So too exclusive in one day. I'm treating you. In 2016, I brokered a deal for a really cool, great guy, great athlete as well, Jack Butland, who's a goalkeeper in England. He plays for Crystal Palace. I brokered a deal for him to go to the south of France with the Daily Mail Sport to do some co-commentary for Euro 2016. He'd just been injured, sadly, and missed the tournament. And we went out there and it was fantastic. And at the time, he was playing for a team called Stoke City. And so when we got back from that trip, he had introduced me to their head of player recruitment, so that I could have some conversations regarding player moves and the intermediary side that we spoke about. Now, at the time, 2016, I was just starting the agency. So I didn't have a full grasp on cash flow and this and that. And I probably blew all my money in Cannes in the casino or something, who knows, you know. So when I had got back and I was on the way up to Stoke, I'd run out of money. I booked the train ticket, but I got to the station and I didn't have enough money for the taxi fare from the station to the training ground. This is a true story. So I looked at my Google Maps and the cab journey was 5-6 minutes. It was really close, but the walk was about an hour, right? And in that moment, I didn't have to think twice. I started the walk. Now, a lot of people would have probably maybe turned around, gone back home. They would have figured out an excuse as to why they couldn't get there. For me, I knew that this business that I'm in wasn't just a business for me. It was truly life, something that I eat, sleep, and breathe. So I remember it clear as day. I was in a 3-piece suit, hot summer's day, and I walked from the train station to the training grounds. And because I was so late, you know, an hour walk there, the head of recruitment only had about 10 minutes he could spare for me. So I went from London to Stoke, which is about an hour and a half on the train. Then I walked an hour to the training ground, had a 10-minute meeting, and then walked an hour back. But what that showed me was I had tenacity, right? Which is, for me, the most important quality that a person can have in life, but certainly in sports agency, and definitely in entrepreneurship, because you'll testify, you're going to have more no's in this business than yeses. That's the way it is. I don't care who you are. You could be Clutch Sports, Rubicon Talent Management, the Athletic Network, the agency who represent The Rock, whoever. You're going to get more no's than yeses because there are so many other great options available. But it's about right, do I dust myself off and go again? So, the point that you mentioned was so important. Entrepreneurship. Everyone wants to be an entrepreneur. Everyone's got CEO of something in their Instagram bio now, right? CEO of this eyelash company, CEO of this agency. But it's more than just three letters. It's about every day what your stand is like. And what I'll finish off with is, I don't know the name of the coach at Oklahoma University, but I saw a video on Twitter where he said, your culture isn't just saying, I've got a culture, right? It's not just, yeah, we focus on relationships or, whatever it might be. Your culture is your habits, your day to day, brick by brick. How am I getting better? How am I improving? How am I getting closer to my goal every day? And that's really at the heart of entrepreneurship. I love Therabody is a great example as a brand. Jason Worsland, the CEO there, is a guy that I've had some conversations with and someone I respect massively. He gets it. He understands it's about brick by brick. How can we make sure that this thing we call culture and hustle is actually coming to life?
Well, we've been so lucky to have Akin Caulker on our 76 Capital Leadership Series. And as we wind down, I have one last question I have to ask you. You mentioned it early in our conversation, and I know it's something that you're very passionate about, is women's sports.
Yes.
And where do you believe women's sports are going? And just like kind of what's next in that world?
Man, I'm glad we're finishing on that because it's on such an upward curve. We're very fortunate that we work with some of the best young female athletes, I believe, in the UK. Laura Rafferty, Izzy Bryant, Izzy Noons, Tiggy Gent. There's a number of players. Those are soccer players, footballers. But there's a number of talents who are really moving forwards and who are going to be the faces of their sports in the next few years. I think players like Megan Rapinoe in US women's soccer have been unbelievable in not just fighting for equality in terms of that gender parity, but in saying, hey, actually, if you watch what we're doing, it's good. The product is good. I have to say, I do think there's still a gap between, for example, the NBA and WNBA in terms of performance. Because if you go to a basketball game, you want to see people dunk, right? You want to be entertained. So we need more of that in the women's game. In women's soccer, we need fitter athletes, faster athletes. We focus really heavily. I become a bit of a Joseph Stalin when it comes to how our female players are looking after their bodies, because right now the bar isn't high enough. They need to be doing a lot more. We've partnered up with some great strength and conditioning and sprint coaches here, guys like Dwayne Chambers, who used to run for Team GB, Anika, Neuro, etc. So the focus there is on making sure that physically our girls are really going through the roof. And then what that's going to mean is the end product's going to be better, which is going to mean more fans and more eyes are going to watch it and respect it. But it's a huge part of my business right now. We have a team dedicated to female athletes. And, the great thing is a brand who wants to partner with a female athlete, more often than not, is going to be paying less, right? That's where the market is, just being black and white. But you're going to get a significant and similar bang for your buck. Yeah, women's sport is in a really great place. I want to give an honorable mention to Simone Biles as well, who, in the past few weeks has been front and center regarding her mental health. And I don't know the ins and outs of her. She had a relative who passed away, I believe. But even to be at an Olympic Games with all of that going on speaks volumes for who she is. So I'm excited to see where women's sport's going. And we've got to get you to a game. There's a Euros in England next summer. So by then, the travel corridor should be open. So come over for a game and we'll look after you.
Well, I would certainly love that. And I've certainly really loved having you on our show. I mean, it's been a great conversation. Love to hear all the things that you're working on and want to wish you the best of luck. And again, thank you so much for being on our show.
Honestly, the pleasure's mine. And I want to finish off by saying 76 Capital. There aren't many companies in the finance sector who have focused on how can we digitally become relevant and tell stories and engage. And you guys are doing it better than anyone else. So it's a pleasure for me to have been on here. I'll continue to watch, and I appreciate you mentioning the best dressed agent thing 3 or 4 times just so that resonates.
Well, I got it one more time. Here we go. Again, Akin, thank you so much for being our guest on our 76 Capital Leadership Series. He is the CEO of the Athletic Network and the best dressed agent out there. You can follow him on Twitter at Akin_SC. And remember, if you're an entrepreneur, an athlete, a student, a business person, and you want to work or start a company in the sports world, whether it's in the sports betting industry, the esports industry, the sports tech industry, the agency world around sports, or the sports media industry, reach out to us at 76 Capital. We would love to connect with you and see if there are ways that we can help you build your network, your brand, your company. You never know. We could potentially become partners. Once again, I'm Wayne Kimmel. Thank you for tuning in for this edition of our 76 Capital Leadership Series. And again, Akin, thank you so much for joining us. You got to go out there. And as we've all talked about, you got to go out there and just go make it happen. Thanks for tuning in, everybody.
Cheers, man.